So, Nick,
Mike.
Nick is the founder of Root Project. This is meant to be a fireside chat. There's no fire, but there are really hot lights. But we'll keep it relatively informal. But Nick's doing some fantastic work at Root Project, and we had a chance to chat a little bit about that before starting the session. So maybe Nick, if you could take 2 to 3 minutes to tell us a little bit about what Root Project are doing, and specifically when it comes to thinking about positive impact and creative financial approaches.
Yeah. So, sit back for 1 minute. I'm a political economist. I'm always wary of being the blockchain guy at a non-blockchain conference.
We're going to talk a lot about blockchain, by the way.
So, Root Project is a nonprofit that marries a crowdfunding platform with a on-the-ground on-the-ground program for homeless people and people in danger of being homeless to have day labor. And we scale services, or we will scale services, because we just finished our fundraising a few months ago, using a crypto asset on the back end.
Pause. What's a crypto asset? Can you raise your hand if you know what a crypto asset is? And keep your hand up if you want me to call on you to explain it. Okay. Can you explain what a crypto asset is?
Yeah. So people have probably heard the term cryptocurrencies. You guys have heard of Bitcoin. I don't like that term. I think most people in the space at this point are a little sick of it because these things aren't currencies. They're assets. They rely on blockchain because they take on tremendous economic value. So it's just a digital measure of value that enough people believe in that it takes on real world value. So you can cash out Bitcoin, cash out Ethereum, other large crypto assets for a lot of money.
But if we talk about crypto, I mean, is that not just how a pyramid scheme is built? You have kind of people who believe in something, not much exists. I mean, or is it more than that?
Well, sometimes the conversation goes down to, really what is value, right? In this case, there's a lot of direct real-world uses, cross-border payments. They're vastly more efficient than what we have in today's financial system. But the big thing that cryptocurrencies have brought has been this world of blockchain. And you guys have probably heard the phrase Web 1.0, Web 2.0, Web 3.0. 2.0 was when the web went from fundamentally immobile to mobile and social driven. And I like to sort of get people excited about where we are with Web 3.0 right now by kind of casting people's minds back to when they first put cameras on cell phones. When you guys first got a cell phone that had a camera on it, did you really think much would come of it? And it was kind of funny, you'd be at a party, you'd take photos of your friends doing stupid stuff, and that was about it. Cut to 5 years later, and the political cost of state violence has dramatically increased because the ability to document it is ubiquitous, right? That's the Arab Spring, that's a lot of Black Lives Matter, that's fundamental impact that has come from technological change. And it happened in an incredibly short amount of time and shook regimes that have been in place for 40 years.
And that's going from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0.
Yep.
Now what about Web 2.0 to Web 3.0?
So Web 3.0 is fundamentally decentralized. Instead of companies that have large databases and platforms, you have decentralized networks of computers that are running a protocol that nobody controls and that allow for disintermediated interaction. So if I send you Ether over the blockchain, nobody is approving that. That's a protocol that governs that, yes, this is actually true, and there's been no approval process, which is economically costly.
So how does that get applied then to creating positive impacts? I mean, you hear about people kind of looking at supply chains, right? For big kind of organizations who are working in developing economies, work with smallholder farmers, or in the mining space, companies like Fairphone, who are really looking to kind of diligence and kind of create kind of fair trade products. Does it apply? It's more than just a currency, right?
Right. Yeah, so the answer is on a deeply systemic level. So that means that we're not tinkering just with one or two things. Supply chains is a great use case. But just like going from Web 1.0, where you went from fundamentally immobile internet technology to fundamentally mobile, what blockchain is a technological system where you go from records that are fundamentally hackable to records that are fundamentally unhackable. They take more computational power than what exists in order to hack a blockchain. That's why Bitcoin can be worth hundreds of billions of dollars and nobody has ever been able to hack it.
In a 10-second example, what do you mean from hackable to unhackable?
So a blockchain is a system that just distributes the same file over thousands of computers. And so if you wanted to hack that, and then there's just a consensus algorithm that says the version that 51% of these computers say is real is the real file. And so to hack that, you got to hack thousands of computers. You got to hack 51% of the computers in the network, which if you design the system right, is genuinely impossible.
So this is that concept of distributed ledger, and that's why everyone's so excited about blockchain and its applications.
Yeah.
What if we shift a little bit? I mean, you guys are doing some fantastic research right now, so I'd love to hear a little bit about the research. But what are the implications of blockchain and its application to actually how funds are raised and how funds are deployed in the impact and investment space?
Yeah. So Mike's bringing up my research group we're rolling out our first report called Understanding the New Paradigm of Liquid Venture Capital. And that's coming in the next few weeks. And sorry, I plugged my product there. I forgot.
Yeah, no, good plug, good plug. So read that report when it's out.
Yeah.
You can find it somewhere on the interweb, on the blockchain, if that's a thing. But no. So this is about your new report and how. So if anyone was here for the last section on impact investment, there was some talk about this kind of gap of funding, and we need blended finance and blended funding. And one of the things that kind of causes that gap is that people's capital goes into amazing projects that can change the world, but if it goes in as equity, it's locked there 5 years, 10 years, 15 plus years. The venture capital model is you put your money into a fund structure and it stays there 10 plus 2 plus 5 years until you might get it out. Now, what are the applications, specifically kind of linking back to the research that you guys are doing for applying blockchain to the new kind of venture capital model to create liquidity, to increase the flow of funds into impactful companies?
Yeah, so liquidity is a major pain point of almost all impact investing, right? It really takes excellent portfolios and holds them back, even if those portfolios are so good that they outperform on their substance. Like you said, you have to hold on to them for 10 years. So what creates illiquidity? It's usually the cost of financial innovation and the cost of financial transaction. And here's what's really exciting about what's going on right now, is that the cost of financial innovation, the cost of financial transaction has gone from extremely high to basically zero. So if you wanted to talk about some exotic derivative that you would need to fund an impact project that might cost $250,000 to draft and then $50,000 for a team of lawyers to evaluate, I can go code that out as a smart contract that's fundamentally improved over that derivative in about an afternoon.
Okay, wow, which is much more effective than, I mean, we hear that blockchain, so for Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency, the energy usage is more than the majority of the kind of countries on this planet. We're at ChangeNow, we're thinking not just about kind of innovations in finance to create positive social impact, but also what are the environmental kind of impacts of this. And we hear about blockchain for X, for Y, for Z, blockchain kind of applied to everything. I mean, blockchain can't be applied to everything, right? And surely, if it's so expensive to kind of implement, then we're going to be destroying the environment if we use blockchain for everything. But can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so you guys might have read about some of the environmental consequences of Bitcoin, and they are really bad. That all rests on a very inefficient algorithm. It's literally the first algorithm that Satoshi Nakamoto proposed, the mythical creator of Bitcoin, more than a decade ago. That's called proof of work. And that's basically, at this point, antiquated. There are other cryptocurrencies that employ it, but there's another set of consensus algorithms called proof of stake that just require the computer participants to put a little bit of value, sort of skin in the game, to say that we're not going to be a bad actor. And those algorithms, again, prove that you can't hack these systems if they're designed correctly. And there is not remotely the same energy cost. So if we're talking about blockchain and energy usage, blockchain one of the things it's really good at is facilitating micropayments. So if you and I live in the same neighborhood, or maybe if our grandkids live in the same neighborhood, the energy grid that they'll have is not going to be taking energy from a central power plant. It's going to be taking it from someone's solar panel and sending it over to their neighbors when their panels aren't working or something like that.
You talk about our grandkids. We don't have grandchildren. However, that implies kind of a few generations from now, and it implies that this is the sort of thing that will be happening in 40, 50 years' time. With Global Innovation Fund, we see interesting innovations, actually, such as what you're talking about now.
Yeah.
So emerging markets that have microgrids, taking solar energy, converting it to energy, and then people talking about applying the blockchain to kind of manage those transactions. Is blockchain the only way to actually kind of answer these questions? And is this something that's only going to happen in 40, 50 years? Or can we actually see stuff happening kind of if our kids live in the same neighborhood?
So that's what's exciting, is it can happen right now. But I put that time frame on it because you have entrenched interests, because you have slow adoption. We can build those grids out now, and blockchain is necessary for that, because you do need to have sets of very, very small micropayments that you would not want to just have on a database, because it would be hackable. Somebody could get in there, change things without you knowing, and steal a lot of money.
Right.
So yes, blockchain is necessary, and the only thing that makes this a decades-long story is how quickly do investors, how quickly do regulators, how quickly do thought leaders really push governments and entrenched interests to adopt a technology that's fundamentally disruptive, fundamentally better for the environment.
And regulation, obviously if we look at the current currencies that we use across the world, there's regulation, there's kind of central bank. How does regulation fit into blockchain? And obviously a lot of the entrenched interests are perhaps even more so entrenched because there's a sense that they lose control and they can't regulate. So how does that reality of the blockchain kind of fit in with the future of finance?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's another reason that what's going on right now is so exciting. So one of the things I'm also a partner at a blockchain incubator in San Francisco, and we have a lot of corporate clients. One of the hard things is always telling people that they have to abide by market norms as they exist right now. The things 6 months ago were just radically different, because things are moving so quickly. And so regulatorily, there has been some bad news that is kind of leaking out of the United States. But
Donald Trump.
Yeah. There's no shortage of bad news.
Okay.
Yeah.
Different bad news.
Sorry for that, guys.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Our kids live in the same neighborhood.
Yeah. No, those are my grandkids.
This is the American, no shortage of bad news when it comes to regulation coming out of the US and how we deal with that.
Yeah. But we have been seeing really positive regulatory developments in Singapore. Actually, I'm super excited about France. They're close to, it looks like, passing a law that will just straight up white label some really good ICOs. So they're not just France isn't just embracing blockchain, they're embracing crypto and this liquid venture capital paradigm.
ICO, very quickly.
Yeah.
What's an ICO?
Initial coin offering. So here's where we're at. 2 years ago, initial coin offerings were a tiny fraction, a few $100 million, nothing compared to traditional early stage venture capital. Now, ICOs by volume outstrip all of early stage venture capital. So that's 2 years, that's a foundational change. And that's before regulatory clarity, like the type of stuff that's coming out of France, other major places, have really kind of cleared the road.
Do we know if the majority of the people who are participating in these ICOs are people who have made their money kind of on the rise of kind of cryptocurrencies, or are these sophisticated investors who see this as an interesting emerging asset class who say, okay, I'd like to kind of play in this space?
Yeah, killer question. It's last year, 2017, very domain-specific knowledge. A lot of investors, 26-year-old kids that were worth $300 million, and brilliant people, but not experienced investors. We saw towards the end of the year, really New York finance in particular, really wake up to this. So, for instance, the largest fund, Galaxy Fund, Mike Novogratz, just traditional finance guy. I'd say it's something to be studied, but it's about 50-50 now in terms of blockchain-specific investors and either some impact investors, some just traditional hedge funds.
Okay. Well, I want to take us back a little bit to thinking about positive impact and the concept or the idea of using a sort of blockchain technology to track and trade positive impact in a way that captures the externalities, both positive and negative, from companies. So in the same way that we tried to build kind of carbon markets for kind of tracking environmental impact and trying to kind of increase the game. Do you see that as a potential real application of the blockchain and as something that can help catalyze the impact investment markets?
Yep. Yeah, so the supply chain story is super important and actually goes back a little bit to the regulatory question too. So you see, laws about to pass in France. One of the most important standards in blockchain is called the ERC20 standard. I don't need to go into the details, but the gentleman that invented it, Fabian Vogelsteller, is a great sort of leader in the space. And he's a friend of mine, I should say, since I'm about to talk about his project. But he is doing a industry-specific blockchain for the fashion industry. And so the ability to track the whole supply chain, create industry norms of radical, well, I shouldn't use the phrase radical transparency, but total transparency, that's a game changer. That can, sunlight is the greatest disinfectant, right? And so the ability to manage a whole supply chain, have people do it publicly, and identify particular objects as not knockoffs.
Yeah.
That's a big one for the fashion industry. Fabian is doing his project out of Berlin under the German government. Again, another example of regulators kind of moving in the right direction for really incredible impact projects.
One thing the audience doesn't know about you that I think is accurate is that you have a PhD in, is it exchange? It's something to do with foreign currency exchange. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I'm a political economist. I got my PhD from Department of Political Science and primarily studied foreign exchange markets.
I've got a question for you, Doctor.
Yeah.
So one thing, when we talk about impact investment, and we try to compare it to the mainstream financial markets, which is somewhat how this market has been built. People talk about creating positive impact and thinking about investing in companies and creating impact. And if you invest in companies and you create a financial impact in dollars or in pounds or in euros, there's a globally agreed exchange rate across all of those currencies. This is something that surely you'll have learned in your.
That's why my forehead is this fat. I got this much gray hair.
But when it comes to impact and impact returns, the exchange rates are objective. Impact returns are subjective.
Yep.
So the value of a life of a 12-month-old in Palestine or in North Korea or in Manhattan, if it's a boy or if it's a girl, or if they're 85. So the value of a life can't be exchanged in the same way as kind of currencies. So there's truly a difference between mainstream finance. Do you see any ways that blockchain can take into consideration the subjective nature of impact and impact returns to help catalyze the market?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't think we were going to get that.
I didn't tell you I was going to ask you that question.
No, the answer is yes. Yeah, in 30 seconds?
Oh, time's up.
So the answer is universal identity standards.
Okay.
On the blockchain, unhackable. So a gentleman by the name of Ahmad Mustak, formerly the CIO of Capricorn Ventures in London, actually. Brilliant guy. Working on universal identity solution that provides a whole host of sort of valuation, direct investment in individuals, disintermediation of peer-to-peer contact. That is, frankly, it took me about 6 months to really come around to it. But the final point here, what's so important about this is coming one way or the other, right? A lot of this sort of individual tracking is either going to come from sort of state-backed power, extremely hierarchical, and at that point extremely dangerous to society's long-run sort of political economic equilibria, or it can come from decentralized technology building that creates an equilibrium where standards, transparency, valuation of real people is universally accepted. And that is, we're at, decades out and some of the kind of trippier things. But what's exciting about getting into blockchain right now as impact investors is that this is an arms race. Technology builds out institutional capacity, and it's either going to be the pro-democratic actors that get it first or the anti-democratic actors that do.
You've heard it from...
So come help.
Yeah, you've heard it from Nicolas Judge. Come help, and join me in thanking him for his insights. Thank you. Next up, I'm going to look off to the side just to check. Yes? Fantastic. Thank you. So next up, I am going to introduce someone who actually needs no introduction. We have the CEO of BNP Paribas, Jean-Laurent Bonnafé.
So, good afternoon. Just on my way back from New York, I had the possibility to follow a number of initiatives, the One Planet Summit, quite interesting. Michael Bloomberg Conference, quite interesting and brilliant too. And some initiatives at the United Nations, including the fact that this year BNP Paribas and myself were the thematic champion for the He for She initiative, and it was really a great honor to be able to participate in that event. So being back from New York, I believe I had enough of English for this week, and I will move to French to save some very precious minutes, if I may. Donc, pour faire simple, et on le voit quand on est une banque qui travaille dans 80 pays, il y a un certain nombre de sujets qui sont en train de monter très fort. Vous le savez, le climat, les inégalités, les territoires au sens de